Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Nikki Newman's hard-fought divorce, only for the day to spiral into a nightmare that leaves Nikki physically collapsing, Victor standing like a dark titan of vengeance, and every alliance in the room shattered beyond repair, because from the moment Nikki steps into the courtroom, steady on the outside but already trembling within, it's clear she senses something is wrong, a shift in the air. An unspoken confidence radiating from Victor that chills her more than any insult he has ever thrown her way. And while Nikki has spent weeks believing she finally had the upper hand with documentation, testimony, and what she thought was airtight evidence of Victor's manipulation, she is unprepared for the way Victor watches her that morning, calm, patient, almost serene, as if he's been waiting for this exact moment. And when proceedings begin, the judge's measured tone does nothing to soften the tension as lawyers present arguments that feel almost ceremonial, because Victor isn't reacting, isn't interrupting, isn't fuming the way he usually does. He's biding his time, and Nikki notices it too late, her eyes darting toward him as her attorney confidently outlines Victor's alleged misconduct, his financial coercion, his emotional manipulation, the years of control that allegedly poisoned their marriage, and for a brief moment Nikki allows herself to believe the nightmare is nearly over, that freedom is within reach, that this chapter of her life will finally close. But then Victor stands, slowly, deliberately, the scrape of his chair echoing through the courtroom like a warning bell, and with that signature Newman authority he asks for permission to submit newly discovered evidence. Words that land like a gunshot, because Nikki's attorney immediately objects, citing procedure, timing, fairness, yet Victor's legal team is prepared, presenting documentation of proper filing, chain of custody, and judicial relevance, and when the judge allows it, the room seems to tilt on its axis, Nikki's breath catching as Victor nods to his attorney, who approaches the bench with a sealed folder that looks far too thick to be innocent, and as the first document is displayed, Nikki's color drains instantly, because it's not what she expected, not financial records, not business contracts, but personal material, devastatingly intimate proof that Victor claims dismantles Nikki's entire narrative, including medical records, private communications, and sworn statements from individuals Nikki never imagined would turn against her, all pointing to a shocking allegation that Nikki knowingly misrepresented key facts under oath, manipulating the court's sympathy while concealing her own actions. And as the judge reads silently, Nikki's hands begin to shake uncontrollably, her attorney whispering urgently, trying to understand how Victor obtained such material, but Victor remains silent, letting the evidence speak for him. And when the judge finally asks Victor to elaborate, he does so with surgical precision, outlining how Nikki allegedly falsified timelines, selectively edited correspondence, and concealed meetings that contradict her testimony. And then comes the real bombshell, the proof that breaks her, because Victor produces a verified recording, authenticated, time-stamped, legally obtained, of Nikki admitting in private that she intended to take Victor for everything, not as justice, but as revenge, a statement that sends an audible gasp rippling through the courtroom as Nikki struggles to stand, her knees buckling, her vision blurring, her entire world crashing down in real time, and as the recording plays, her own voice echoes through the room, raw, bitter, and undeniable, and the judge's expression hardens. Nikki's attorney desperately moves to suppress the evidence, arguing context, emotional distress, but it's too late. The damage is done, and Nikki's chest tightens. Her breathing becomes shallow, panic surging as years of carefully constructed dignity unravel in seconds, and when she tries to speak, to deny it, to explain, nothing comes out, her body betraying her as thoroughly as Victor ever could, and suddenly she collapses, slumping forward as gasps turn to chaos, court officers rushing forward, her attorney shouting for help, and Victor watches, his face unreadable, because this isn't triumph the way the room expects. It's something colder, heavier, like the culmination of a long, bitter war that demanded a sacrifice no one fully understands, and as paramedics are called, Nikki is helped into a chair, trembling, barely conscious, tears streaming down her face as reality crashes over her in merciless waves, because she realizes Victor didn't just defend himself, he destroyed her credibility, her case, her moral high ground, and as the judge orders a recess, the courtroom buzzes with whispered speculation, reporters scribbling furiously, because this isn't just a divorce anymore, it's a public reckoning, and outside the courtroom, the fallout spreads instantly, with family members reeling, some rushing to Nikki's side, others stunned into silence, and when proceedings resume later, the tone is irrevocably altered, because the judge addresses Nikki directly, sternly reminding her of the seriousness of perjury, of the obligation to tell the truth, and Nikki, pale and shaken, can barely lift her eyes, her voice cracking as she insists she never intended to mislead the court, that she was emotional, vulnerable, afraid of Victor's power, but the judge is unmoved, pointing out that fear does not excuse deception, and Victor finally speaks again, his voice steady, resonant, declaring that he never wanted to humiliate Nikki, but would not allow lies to define him, that he protected himself with truth, and those words sting more than any insult, because for Nikki they ring hollow, cruel, and devastatingly final, and as the judge announces that the court will consider sanctions, potential penalties, and a full reassessment of the divorce settlement in light of the new evidence, Nikki's world collapses all over again, because everything she fought for, financial independence, moral vindication, closure, is now in jeopardy, and the once certain victory has become a humiliating defeat, and when court adjourns, Victor walks out surrounded by his legal team, reporters shouting questions he doesn't answer, while Nikki is escorted out quietly, supported on both sides. Her collapse not just physical, but symbolic of a woman brought low by secrets exposed under unforgiving fluorescent lights, and as Genoa City reels from the shockwaves, alliances begin to fracture, loyalties are questioned, and whispers circulate about who helped Victor obtain the evidence, because someone close to Nikki betrayed her, someone she trusted, and that revelation threatens to ignite an entirely new war. Because while Victor may have won the courtroom battle, the emotional aftermath is far from over, with Nikki facing not only legal consequences, but the shattering realization that her fight against Victor may have cost her more than she ever imagined. And as the episode closes, one truth is undeniable. This was never just a divorce. It was the ultimate Newman showdown, and Nikki's collapse marks a turning point that will haunt every corner of Genoa City for years to come. The shockwaves from Nikki's collapse don't stop at the courthouse doors. They follow her all the way to the hospital, to the Newman Ranch, to every whispered conversation in Genoa City, because when a woman like Nikki Newman falls in public, the impact is seismic, and as the ambulance doors slam shut and sirens wail through the streets, the reality finally hits everyone watching that this was never just about paperwork, property, or pride, but about decades of love twisted into warfare. And as Nikki lies on the gurney, oxygen mask pressed to her face, her mind drifts between consciousness and memory, flashing back to moments that now feel like cruel foreshadowing. Victor's calm smile, his patience, the way he never panicked even when she believed she had him cornered. And for the first time, she wonders if this outcome was inevitable, if she underestimated the one man who has always known her better than anyone else. And back at the courthouse, the press explodes into a frenzy, headlines already forming before the ink dries on the judge's notes, because Nikki Newman collapses after shock evidence is the kind of scandal that feeds on itself, and while Victor's team moves swiftly to shield him from questions, the damage to Nikki's image spreads like wildfire, turning sympathy into skepticism, admiration into doubt, and when word reaches the Newman family, reactions fracture along fault lines that have existed for years, with Victoria furious, not at Victor, but at the chaos he unleashed, demanding to know why he couldn't have handled it privately, while Nick is torn apart, rushing to Nikki's side at the hospital, yet haunted by the possibility that his mother lied under oath, and Adam, standing apart as always, watches the fallout with a calculating silence, because he recognizes the move for what it was. Classic Victor Newman domination, ruthless, perfectly timed, and devastatingly effective. At the hospital, Doctors confirm Nikki suffered a severe anxiety-induced collapse compounded by exhaustion and emotional shock, and as she awakens hours later in a quiet room washed in sterile light, the reality presses down on her chest heavier than any physical pain, because even before anyone speaks, she knows. She lost, not just the case, but control of the narrative, and when Victoria enters first, arms crossed, eyes blazing with restrained emotion, the silence between mother and daughter is suffocating until Victoria finally asks the question everyone is thinking. Is it true? And Nikki turns her head away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, because the truth is complicated, layered with fear, anger, and years of feeling powerless despite her wealth and status. And while she insists she never intended to commit perjury, that she was protecting herself from Victor's shadow, Victoria struggles to reconcile the woman she idolized with the one now facing potential legal consequences. And when Nick arrives moments later, gentler, more conflicted, taking Nikki's hand and assuring her he believes she never meant harm, Nikki breaks completely, sobbing with the raw grief of someone who realizes too late that desperation can destroy even the most righteous intentions. Meanwhile, Victor returns to the ranch alone, the victory tasting bitter on his tongue, because despite the courtroom triumph, he knows he crossed a line that can never be erased, and as he pours himself a drink he doesn't even touch, memories of Nikki flood him, her laughter, her strength, her resilience, and for a fleeting moment he wonders if he went too far, but that doubt hardens quickly into resolve, because in Victor's world, survival demands preemptive strikes, and allowing Nikki to redefine him in court was never an option, no matter the cost. And yet when he overhears a hushed conversation between Adam and his lawyer on the phone, hinting at how the evidence was obtained, Victor freezes, realizing that the betrayal Nikki fears may not have come from an obvious enemy, but from within the family itself, because the recording, the most damning piece, could only have come from someone Nikki trusted implicitly, someone present during her most unguarded moments. And as Victor presses Adam later, the tension crackles with unspoken accusations, Adam deflecting with practiced ease, leaving Victor to wonder whether his own son engineered the final blow not out of loyalty, but strategy. As the days pass, the legal ramifications tighten like a noose, with Nikki's attorney warning her that the judge is seriously considering sanctions for misleading testimony, possibly even reopening prior rulings related to asset division, and the humiliation is crushing, because Nikki built her case on moral authority, on being the victim who finally stood up to Victor's control, and now that foundation has crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. And when she finally faces Victor again, this time not across a courtroom but in a private meeting arranged by their lawyers, the air between them is thick with unresolved emotion, because Victor arrives composed but visibly strained, and Nikki, still pale but steadier, looks at him with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, accusing him of orchestrating her downfall not for justice but punishment. And Victor counters that he simply refused to be destroyed by lies, that he warned her repeatedly to stop escalating the war, and the argument spirals into a brutal reckoning of their past, of mutual manipulation, of love weaponized into leverage. And when Nikki finally asks him whether any part of him regrets what he did, Victor hesitates, just a fraction of a second. But that pause is enough to devastate her, because it confirms what she fears most, that in Victor Newman's world, regret is a luxury he can't afford. Outside their personal battlefield, Genoa City shifts uneasily, alliances recalibrating as people reassess where they stand, because if Nikki Newman can fall this hard, no one is untouchable, and whispers grow louder about the mysterious source of Victor's evidence, with fingers pointing at former allies, assistants, even family members. And when Nikki receives an anonymous message hinting that the truth about the recording will come out, a new fire ignites within her, because humiliation has hardened into determination, and she resolves not to let Victor control the ending of the story, not again. And quietly, methodically, she begins her own investigation, reaching out to old contacts, reviewing timelines, piecing together moments she once dismissed, until the picture that forms is chilling, because all signs point toward a calculated betrayal designed not just to help Victor, but to destabilize Nikki completely, and the realization that someone orchestrated her collapse for. Personal gain fuels a resolve stronger than any courtroom argument. As Nikki regains her strength, she also regains her voice, and when she finally addresses the public, carefully, strategically, she doesn't lash out or deny responsibility, but acknowledges her mistakes while emphasizing the emotional toll of decades under Victor's influence, reframing the narrative from deception to survival, and the response is mixed but powerful because vulnerability resonates, and slowly, sympathy begins to return, not as unquestioning support, but as understanding, and Victor watches this shift with narrowed eyes, recognizing a familiar resilience rising in the woman he once loved fiercely, because Nikki Newman has never stayed down for long, and he knows the war isn't over. It's simply entering a new phase, one where courtroom victories mean less than public perception and emotional truth. The final blow of this chapter comes quietly, not with shouting or collapse, but with revelation. When Nikki uncovers proof that the recording Victor used was obtained through manipulation rather than chance, implicating someone close, someone whose ambition eclipsed loyalty, and as she prepares to expose the truth, the stakes escalate beyond divorce into a full-scale power struggle that threatens to tear the Newman family apart from the inside, because this time, Nikki isn't fighting for assets or validation. She's fighting for her identity, her dignity, and the right to define her own story. And as Genoa City braces for the next explosion, one thing is certain. Nikki's collapse in divorce court wasn't the end. It was the spark that ignited a far more dangerous reckoning, one that will force every character to choose sides, reveal secrets, and face the consequences of underestimating a woman who refuses to stay broken. The reckoning Nikki sets in motion begins subtly, almost invisibly, because she has learned the hard way that brute force only invites Victor to strike harder, and instead she chooses patience, gathering fragments of truth the way she once gathered courage in darker days. And as she retraces the weeks leading up to the courtroom disaster, patterns emerge that make her blood run cold, because conversations were steered, emotions deliberately inflamed, moments of vulnerability encouraged at precisely the wrong times, and the more she reflects, the clearer it becomes that someone didn't merely overhear her confession of revenge. They engineered it, coaxing her to speak when she was raw and reckless. And when Nikki finally confronts the realization that manipulation doesn't always wear Victor's face, that sometimes it hides behind empathy and shared pain, the betrayal cuts deeper than any legal defeat, because it means her collapse wasn't just the result of her own desperation, but the outcome of a carefully laid trap. As Nikki digs deeper, she begins to notice how Adam's shadow lingers at the edges of every crucial moment, not through obvious action but through absence, through silence where guidance might have helped, through encouragement that pushed her anger just a little further, and while she refuses to jump to conclusions, the evidence stacks relentlessly, and when she finally requests a private meeting with Adam, the tension is unbearable, because Adam arrives calm, guarded, and just a bit too prepared, and when Nikki asks him directly whether he knew the recording would surface in court, his eyes flicker for the briefest instant, a tell she recognizes from years of family confrontations, and although he never outright admits guilt, his carefully worded answers reveal more than he intends, because Adam doesn't deny orchestrating circumstances, only insists that he never forced Nikki to say anything untrue. And that distinction devastates her, because it confirms her worst fear. That her pain was used as leverage in a larger game she never agreed to play. The confrontation sends ripples through the family, because once Nikki begins quietly sharing her suspicions, loyalties fracture again, with Nick furious at the idea that Adam may have sacrificed their mother's stability for strategic advantage, while Victoria wrestles with the uncomfortable truth that Victor's legacy of manipulation has infected his children, teaching them that victory matters more than compassion. And Victor himself is forced to face a reckoning he never anticipated, because, while he believed he controlled the battlefield, he may have unknowingly empowered a move that threatens to implode the family from within. And when Victor confronts Adam privately, the exchange is explosive, not with shouting but with icy restraint, because Adam doesn't apologize, doesn't back down. instead arguing that Nikki's downfall was inevitable, that Victor would have been destroyed if he hadn't intervened, and that sentiment chills Victor more than open rebellion ever could, because it mirrors his own philosophy too perfectly, reflecting it back at him like an accusation. At the same time, Nikki's legal situation continues to evolve, because